Good evening, everyone. I am Shubhangi, and I'm part of the branding and communications team at Academy. And I welcome you all to today to the Kaleidoscope, one of the sessions of the Kaleidoscope series. Um, for those of you who know a little bit about, and I know a lot of learners are also excited and are joining us for these sessions. But for those of you who do not know about And Academy is a one-of-a-kind online design upskilling school which comes from the pedigree of design education, which is IIAD, which is a brick and mortar design school based in New Delhi, Okhla. And IIAD has been imparting design education for over a decade now. So, An Academy actually comes from that pedigree, and we offer professional courses in the domains of graphic design, interior design, and UI UX design. But we will not be talking about our courses and our offerings today. Today, we are here discussing one of the sessions, which is a part of our Kaleidoscope series. So, Kaleidoscope as a property was conceptualized as a series of online masterclasses that explore the myriad perspectives of design. Each session, webinar, or talk is conducted by a design maestro capable of breathing life into pixels and colors. Today's session is led by Jay Dutta, who's a design and a product leader, a UX strategist, and the curator and founder of Designer. A Nick Fury of UX, Jay Datta has built and led high impact design teams across enterprise, prosumer, and consumer domains, delivering multi-million dollar projects that redefine user experiences. Currently leading UX at Deutsche Bank, he has previously shaped product design at Adobe India, Flipkart, and Make My Trip, driving transformational change in some of India's most iconic digital products, including Bengaluru Airport and Arogya Setu app. Founder of Designer Conference, the largest design in tech event in India and Southeast Asia, Jay is also a former Asia Pacific leader for IDA and a sought after mentor and speaker at TEDx, Adobe Max, and Collision. With over 25 years of global experience spanning the UK, US, and Europe and Africa, he brings deep expertise in design leadership, systems thinking, and human centered innovation. A BFA graduate from NID, MSc in Design Management UK, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Jay continues to push the boundaries of design while mentoring the next gen of leaders dedicated to making a meaningful impact through design. With that, I hand it over to Jay. Over to you.
Thank you so much. That was a very long one. I think I should shorten it down to saying Jay is a designer. That's sort of something like that. This is the National Institute of Design. I think those days there weren't too many. There were about just 2 design schools. And of course, it was a very beautiful place, very green, in middle of a desert-like city like Ahmedabad. And we had a fabulous time. At one end, I wanted to be an animator and go into Disney. And the other end, I was very inspired by typography and type design, which did kind of eventually get my attention. So I think somewhere my UX roots were sort with typography because type is a mix of both art and design. So I think it's a happy mix. Sorry, art and science, because it is a happy mix of very technical, very scientific stuff. At the same time, it's very artistic and very expressive in that sense. So very shortly after I graduated, my second boss, I think I had a brief. I stayed in Delhi for a bit, traveled around entirely India in trucks and buses and God knows what, kind of, and completely unreserved. And then my teacher who taught me, who became my second boss, said there's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we ended up designing the identity for India's 50th year of independence. The interesting part, I love this photograph, is because you see 3 prime ministers standing in front of your identity, which you have designed. And also realizing it's not the beauty of the design, it is the moment, it is India, it is much bigger than any of us, any of the prime ministers. The idea of India is what matters. You could have designed any logo and people would have still loved it for the fact that it was the 50th year of independence. So Anyway, after that, I landed up from there somewhere in the middle of nowhere, which is this is I'm talking about just before the turn of the century, and people didn't exactly know Mauritius, or probably didn't see the map, and people would ask me, "Hey, do you have a stopover?" And I'm like, "No, thankfully nothing." Because there is, you just go straight and there's just ocean. I mean, unless you want to go to Diego Garcia, which is a military island overall. So I think the good part was Mauritius was super, super exotic in those days. Today it's very accessible. It was like the Maldives plus plus, and it was like, wow, it meant you're going to a foreign land, because in India we didn't have, the best car we had was a Contessa, which was a little tank by itself. And I think most of the people hearing this would not even know what a Contessa was. And it was a mini tank, essentially, let's put it that way. And of course, it was a very different thing. In Mauritius, I ended up doing a lot of, I ended up pushing the bar, let's put it that way. I did calendars which were unreadable and illegible. So in a way, it was the antithesis of UX. You make it usable and useful, and this was neither usable nor useful, but people loved it and put it up. It was more like posters. And by the way, this is an exercise that I've very often done with many of my teams, to say, how do you 365 days in a year, or maybe 364 days in a year, you create useful, usable stuff. One day, let's create unusable, non-useful things. And how good are you at that? So we do that often. I ended up loving this whole sort of segment of what was called web design and stuff like that, taught myself how to code. This website was done in 1999. It won a bunch of awards because it had a very unusual navigation, and it was a mix of, again, I hand coded everything here. And somehow I ended up getting lots of offers, and people calling me from UK and Europe. Interestingly, the first question will be, where is Mauritius, or which part of the world, east of Africa or west of Africa, etc. So you can imagine, again, remember, there was no Google Maps at this point in time. So I ended up going from a small, tiny island, which you could circumnavigate in about 6 to 8 hours, to a much bigger island, which was the UK, and started doing more of the UX work. I mean, remember those days, again, the word UX had been coined. Don Norman had already coined the word, but it was not in circulation. It was not a currency that we saw readily used. The typical words were interaction design, experience design, or even better still, I was known as a digital art director. There would be, we would borrowing terms from architecture, like for example, information architecture. There would be other terms that we would just beg, borrow, steal, and kind of combine with design and web design and so on. What you see on the right is a very early website for a bank. Remember, banks in those days were also not online as they are today. I mean, the best you can do is to fill up a form and request for a new account, and then you have to go to the branch and then open it. What is very interesting is the phones that you see there. These are all strange shaped phones, and the Steve Jobs had not even launched the iPhone, so every phone was like a weird little gadget out there. This is one of the earliest, and I think probably the first, what is called a configurator. You mix and match things and something comes out. So for example, I was working on Peugeot in Paris for what's the 607. You could actually configure the color, configure the interiors, configure the lights, kind of the chrome, everything. So this became like a big hit in those days. The only problem was that it was still dial-up internet time. So sometimes you had to wait for sites to load and do things for like 2 minutes. And I think we had more patience then also. That was the other part of it. So I went from Manchester to Bristol to other parts and kept going. And of course, in 2001, the whole bubble burst. And the reason why it's called the bubble was the exuberance was irrational. The investment in technology was completely irrational. And of course, in those days, we never thought it was irrational. It felt very rational that technology will change the world. It will kind of create a whole new way of working. And of course, it has. But I think it was a little too premature. I still remember the kind of salaries that we were being paid was completely crazy. So one fine morning, it was September 11, actually, to be precise. I was supposed to be in East Coast, not in New York, thankfully, but someone calls me around lunchtime and says, look what's happening. And it doesn't seem like a film reel or something. And that was when the first plane hit the Twin Towers, and the second, and over a period of time, everything just came tumbling down. I mean, and when I mean it metaphorically, businesses came tumbling down. I used to work for a company called Circle.com. Circle.com, they firstly removed the word .com, and Circle got acquired by a company called RSCG. And sometime in November, I lose my job. Not just me, the person from HR who's calling everyone and kind of giving us the proverbial pink slip also knows that he is going to lose his job. So yeah, essentially there comes the whole game of snake and ladder. So the ladder took me to Mauritius, ladder took me to the UK, and the snake sort of took my job away and go back 5 places. Essentially, once you lose the visa, and you have 30 days to sort of find another alternative job. But in those kind of circumstances, there is no way you're going to find an alternative job. Even people who are locals cannot hope to find an alternative job. So essentially, you go back 2 continents, back to homeland, and wonder what to do next. Of course, what I decided to do after a lot of thought and some freelancing and just trying to keep my mind at bay and everything was, and by the way, one of the things which had happened was that my wife, Aisha, was doing a master's in Bristol at that point of time. Unfortunately, because she was a student dependent, she also had to wind down and wind up everything. And she sort of became a distance education student because of this. I went back to school once again and decided to do design management because I wanted to understand how does the world work. We thought design was everything, tech was the king, and everything together we would rule the world. And suddenly you realize that at the bottom line is economics and business and finance and numbers, and all that fun and from the heart stuff is great, but the bottom line is something else. So this is actually not too far from the Man United, and I'll show that to you in a bit. This is David Roberts. He has passed away. He was a great supporter, a great friend who actually kind of got very interested in what I do. Oops, I think this has gone back. And David kind of got me to do a project. The project worked out very well because this was the time when I'm thinking of design not as an artifact where you don't produce a website necessarily. You do produce a website. He had a CMS system. He used to have a teleseller part of it. So he had a lot of business units. The idea was to unify all of that, which made sense. It was more of design as architecture, design as a branding sort of proposition, design as UX. So it was bringing the various facets of design and seeing how it can help a small or medium-sized business. David's business grew tenfold, and he asked me to come back and become his business partner. And we started a design studio on the side. It was called Ideas Foundry or iFoundry. We talked about how design can be the corporate glue which binds everything together. And it was not just about necessarily doing a website or necessarily doing a brochure or anything like that. It was much more. And we did these. We did branding for conferences. This was his CMS system, or become the CRM system, the eCRM system, as we used to call it. And lots of research, lots of strategy work, and so on. This is where our office was. As you can see, this is the Man United Stadium. Across the road towards the smaller houses on the other side is the Old Trafford cricket ground. And the whole, every time you had a game, you had to shut down because the parking lots would be full of people selling fish and chips and, rival groups kind of coming together. But then again, lo and behold, 2008 appeared and another recession. And this time it was the US subprime market crisis, essentially the long story short. A lot of people took way too many loans than they could service. They could not. Things started crashing. And there we had another round of recession fairly soon after the first. The good part was that I had a sixth sense or a tingling or whatever you call it. And I had talked to David about that. We had discussed at length what we would do and how we would roll back. Interestingly, my very first boss had a wonderful thing to say. She said, "What the hell are you doing in UK where you're already polishing things which are shiny? I mean, what's the point of it? Come back to India. There are airports to be done." And so with that came another once in a lifetime opportunity. After having lost another company, lost a lot of savings, and of course, giving up the visa and going back once again to continents. So, but again, once in a lifetime beckoned. And so this was the Bengaluru Airport project. By the way, those days it was called the Bengaluru Airport because it was done in association with the Zurich Consortium. And they said, we're not going to have any political figure, any famous kind of legendary figure, etc. If it is Bangalore, we'll call it Bangalore or Bengaluru, whichever it is. And it became a rallying cry for not just what will the identity be and how will it stay relevant over the next 10, 20 years, and what would it mean for its people. So this is where the identity came. It was not just the identity, but it was also the flow of people. And this is where my boss said, you seem to understand CRM systems and websites and all of that. They're also about flow. It is graphic design in some ways can be frozen in time, but when you talk about UX, it is a flow in time. So it is very dynamic. So can you bring some of that thinking in the airport project? So that's how the airport thing happened. By the way, in the second airport, if any of you have seen it, I have not been involved, but they've taken this forward in the same spirit, which is lovely to sort of see. Subsequently, Adobe happened. I became the first design head for Adobe India and brought the whole team together. Essentially, there wasn't much of a team. There were some 3-4 people. We then kind of scaled it up to over 60 people. Today, I think there are about 80, 90 or 100 people strong. It was about evangelizing design to Indian product and tech folks, because Adobe US was anyway very design centric. They used to do design for designers, so essentially you had to be. But how do you bring the same sensibility to people here in India and produce for the world? So I think it was about scaling that confidence and multiply the sense of excellence that we had. We did a lot of very experimental projects like the one you see here called Cluster. Cluster later got merged with Behance acquisition. So I think that also was an interesting story. So lots of stories in that half a decade plus that I stayed there. Lots and lots of wonderful experiences of being part of Adobe, which is also the history of design in many ways. So Adobe and the history of design are so deeply connected, and to be part of this iconic brand itself is a wonderful thing. Flipkart called, and I think by this time, as you would have guessed, I have spent most of my life working for companies whose headquarters are outside India. And I've spent a lot more time, maybe a couple of decades, a decade and a half roughly, working for brands which are non-Indians. So I thought I should do an Indian brand, work in an Indian company. So Flipkart called. Flipkart was an interesting experiment. It was very chaotic and it was all very kind of crazy. Speeds were very mad. I think when I look back, I probably learned as much in my year at Flipkart as I did in my maybe 3 years of Adobe. So that was the sort of the way in which time flew and got compressed. A lot of learning in the mobile space, because if you think about it, India and China are some of the leaders in the mobile design space. What we do in mobile, okay, you might say that US has got some great designs, but the kind of stuff we are doing with mobile phones where people are mobile first or mobile only, India is very unique. So in that sense, I think amazing learning at Flipkart. And sorry, it just went back. And at some point of time, the startup bug bit me again, and I decided to do something called ConfIQ. This, by the way, was done by my son, who kind of made me a little leaflet to say, okay, this is what you can say. So there we are. We are again kind of, I had to say goodbye to a salary and go back a few places, lose stocks, which I think in hindsight was a very stupid thing to do for Flipkart. But again, no regrets. Go back a lot of places. But we eventually scaled Conf IQ into something called Attend. And the idea was very simple. We rate and review many things, but we don't rate and review conferences. So what if we could rate and review conferences? And I talked to Deepinder Goyal. I met him at Zomato, and he said, but that's very weird. Why do you want to rate and review conferences? And we did that, and I think we got some money. We had some initial investment coming in. We launched and presented at a number of places. We actually got a shortlist in Collision in Las Vegas, where we won a Promising Startup Award, early startup. Interestingly, my co-founder was working at Adobe and I was working at Flipkart. We were serving our notice periods, but we could not go and talk to the press at that point of time because we still had a full-time job. So anyway, I think this had its own fun times, doing a lot of work for that startup. But again, nothing came out of it because we hit a rough patch in terms of fundraising. And this was a bad time, 2015, 2016, when suddenly there was another funding winter. Everything slowed down overall. So there we got no funding, back to zero. So interestingly, the ladder which was thrown to me was to, can I become a designer in a VC? And that role was a very rare role. I mean, I don't think there are more than about 10 designers who have been part of a VC across the globe and about 2 in India. And when I got this opportunity, I said, of course, yeah, why not? And that in a way kind of opened the sort of thing for me to look at design in different ways, because different founders have different ways of looking at design. So that gave rise to Design Up conferences. And this is one of the ones in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. We had a phenomenal growth. When I average it out, it's about 186% year-on-year growth. Again, it's community driven. It is very volunteer driven, volunteer led sort of conference. So it's not about making money at all, but I think it's just to see how people are taking this up. We had a conference in Singapore as well. We hosted the Who's Who. We have hosted Don Norman. We have hosted Alan Cooper. Lots and lots of famous people. We have done this report called the Design Up Deconstruct. You should look it up. Just do a search and you will find it, which is the state of UX design in India and Southeast Asia. It's again a very interesting report. We need to do it again. This is 2024, the last year's conferences with all the volunteers. They're from all over. You have product managers from Microsoft and design leaders from Standard Chartered Bank, and you name it, kind of everyone's there. You probably know this guy, V. Shivakumar, who keeps coming to and Academy, and he was talking about various things that he is interested in there. This is on an afternoon where people after a heavy lunch are still not falling off to sleep and they're still looking and listening. Okay, I will not digress too much. I know we are kind of getting there in terms of time, but this was again an interesting chapter, Make My Trip. And this was again a brand which was not at a good stage because it was not known for great design. I mean, people called me up when they got to know that I was joining Make My Trip saying, are you crazy? I mean, MMT doesn't get design. This is what MMT looked like. It was just a collage of colors and discounts and more discounts and more discounts, coupons. So they said, you are joking. I mean, it was, I think, going back to that notion what Sujata used to say, that why are you polishing things which are always shiny? You got to go and do things which don't have sheen, which are ugly. You need to make them, I think the phrase would be more like, you need to transform those very ugly business frogs into handsome princes. That would be the thing. What can we do? And not just kind of good looking, but hardworking. That was the other part of it. So this was the whole transformation of Make My Trip. Again, half a decade worth of work there. I managed to sell it to the founders by saying, hey, you don't have the my in Make My Trip. It is very impersonal. And so it was a quest to make it very, very personal that kind of fueled this one. Many of you use it. I still do use it. And I keep commenting back saying this is not working or that is not good or this UX has changed, why is it changed, etc. So we decided on designing an entire, this is one of the very first Indian design systems done completely out in-house, or rather in-house. And this is what you see are many, many components. There was over about 500 components out here. And the Cosmos has changed, it has grown. You've seen another avatar of it, but broadly it remains very much the same. And again, once in a lifetime struck when it was pandemic time and you just kind of walked into this whole crazy mess. And the interesting part was my CEO volunteered me to be part of a task force which was designing what would later become Arogya Setu. Interestingly, we saw this one and we said, hey, this is such a cumbersome flow. This is about someone in Kerala who has been diagnosed with COVID and tracing his entire movement and asking people that if you have been around in this place at this time, please come and get yourself checked. Now, this is a very hard problem because you might not even remember, but you might be susceptible. Maybe your parents are susceptible, grandparents are susceptible. So many things could be out there. That in some ways was a spur for it. And then that became Arogya Setu. Again, it was a private public collaboration. Me from design, I represented design and product. We had someone who had set up Google. He was originally the product guy, but decided to focus on data. And one of my colleagues from MMT, two of my colleagues who worked on the tech part of it with the government of India, the PMO, ICMR, you name it, we did that. One of the craziest projects ever, everyday release, work 24/7. It was like we would finish our work by maybe 5 o'clock. Every day there was a meeting with the PMO and the ICMR and the Niti Aayog. Take a decision, move on and do it. No Sundays, no Saturdays, no weekends. And the tech guys would work overnight, do a release in the morning. Things would be translated into 12, 13, 14 languages, whatever they were, and they would be deployed. This was the routine for the 4 months that we did. And I think it still holds the record for the most downloaded app, of course, in very extenuating circumstances per se. It became more and more. I think the other problem was how do you explain probability to a bunch of people? I mean, probability to your kids, to your parents, to your peers itself is hard to explain. But how do you explain it to someone in Odisha who doesn't even know how to read? That is where some of the very basic colors and illustrations came in. We added later on people like celebrities and film stars and cricket folks to sort of come and talk, because an audio visual would do the trick much better. People learned how to read data and they would engage a lot with the data and the stats. And we developed a system in about 2 months, which is like unheard of, but we designed a design system in about 2 months. And again, also crowdsourced, because this, for example, was done by someone who worked in an agency. On the right, you see something else, which was translated by someone else. So it was a very beautiful collaboration between agencies and individuals and companies, and someone from the Sachivalaya saying, you know what, I know this very well. I know Assamese very well. I will translate it for you. So they would do work overnight, every night sort of thing. And so down, up, these things keep going. That's if I were to quote the Buddha, I mean, I call him the OG of these kind of things. His thing always is there, which is pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And this is what makes me kind of go back and think about how do we, and again, thankfully I have a long career to look back at, but thankfully I can also kind of piggyback on the careers of people like some of the people you see here is AltCwithJD, which is a podcast on alternative careers. Interestingly, also sponsored by Indian Institute of Art and Design. So do look it up if you haven't already. I mean, I keep asking them questions about success, failure, what does it mean? How do they see life? So it is much more than just careers. It is about life. And the one thing that I keep looking for is that one thing, which is that how do you explain, how do you live a satisfying, a happy, I wouldn't say happy probably is the wrong word for it, but how do you live a fulfilling life? What is that one thing that you need to do to live a fulfilling life, to have a fulfilling career of one's own? So I'm going to throw a few things at you, and before we get into Q&A, I think the quality of your life, what you can call a fulfilling life, depends on the quality of your decisions. We are making decisions all the time, sometimes small ones, like what will I have for breakfast, or who do I go out with breakfast, or who do I meet for dinner, or big life decisions. Certain decisions you don't have control over. For example, you cannot have any control over who your parents are, but decisions like who you're going to marry, I mean, that can change your life's trajectory in some ways or a big way. Which job are you going to take up? What are you going to do next? Which city are you going to relocate to? Why? Do you want to go to and try your luck in some other country, etc., etc. So we are making hundreds and thousands of decisions in a day, in our lifetimes. So this is where I would say the first thing is the quality of your life is dependent on the quality of your decisions. And the quality of your decisions is really dependent upon the quality of your thinking. And when I say quality of your thinking, that's a hard one because we don't talk about thinking as an art form, as a science, as something beautiful, but thinking is what we do sometimes, and actually most of the times it is automatically. There is someone inside your head thinking. Suddenly, maybe in the middle of what I was talking, a random song popped up in your head. You didn't pop it up. If I ask all of you to take 5 seconds and think of what's the next thought going to pop up in your head, you have no idea. Because the moment you start thinking about what's the next thought, you break the cycle. So thinking is a very, very critical and central part of what we do, and very often on an automatic basis. And thinking is based on so many different things. The Buddha would say a lot of it is aversion to our fears and attraction to what we desire. We talk about self-awareness, we talk about attention. Again, what we give our attention to, and like you've been giving attention to, hopefully, to my talk and not fiddling or playing on your mobiles. Thinking also has to do with biases and prejudices. Thinking has to do with groupthink. For example, the people that you grew up with, your neighbors, your friends, people talk about how the 5 people that you most associate with change the way you think, for the better or for the worse. Thinking has to do with focus. So for example, are you on an auto-thinking mode, or suddenly do you stop and think, hey, what's happening in my head? Let me just examine my thoughts. So when I say the quality of life, when I say the fulfilling things, bad things happen. Like I was telling you about all the bad things which have happened to me. Have my decisions been right? Not always. Sometimes luck has played a role. No one could have predicted 9/11. No one could have predicted, okay, fine. I mean, you can say Bill Gates kind of talked about a pandemic. So maybe 1 in 7 billion could have predicted that, but no one took him seriously. So it is very hard to predict some of these things. So despite some of your best decisions, you will run up against bad luck or bad timing or bad whatever kind of. But then how you control the narrative, how do you think about it, completely changes your life and the way you look at things. It becomes not a curse, but a learning. That's the overall thing. So I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'm going to talk about frameworks. What are the frameworks to think? One great one which I think about is a 10 by 10 by 10 matrix. You can. So I'm most of these next 3 slides are very practical stuff and more mind-bending to greatly mind-bending stuff. At the other end, the mind-bending stuff is meditation, and I have an interesting sort of a write-up on that, which also has, if you go getting into it for the very first time. Only thing is that nothing will change in the next maybe 10 weeks for you if you meditate. I mean, even if you meditate every day, nothing will change for you, but you got to be in it for the long run. So even if you meditate 10 minutes for 10 weeks, something will start to change. So coming back to the more practical stuff, 10 by 10 is so if you're faced with a dilemma, who do I marry, or what course do I do, or should I do a master's, etc. 10 by 10 by 10 is a very useful framework. What happens if I take a decision or if I don't take a decision, what will change in, let's say, 10 weeks, 10 months, 10 years. Now you could put it another way. What would change in, let's say, 10 hours, 10 days, 10 weeks, or 10 weeks, 10 days, 100 years, whatever, whichever way you want to do it. But think about it. It helps you frame your thinking. The other very interesting one is just like you have goal setting, you have fear setting. And I think we, as I said, I mean, we are driven a lot by our fears, just what we love and what we want to do. So can you make a list of your fears and do a fear setting exercise? What if? I mean, what are the ways? What do you fear? And how can you counter those fears? There is another one called type 1 and type 2 decisions. And type 1 and type 2 decisions are, type 1 are the ones, and I might be getting it completely wrong, are the decisions which are reversible versus irreversible. Like, so for example, again, a very simple example from Make My Trip, you buy a ticket, you buy a hotel and you have 10 days to cancel the hotel and you get 100% refund. So you might as well book it right now because who knows, prices will go up. So it's a very simple decision. You will cancel it. All you need to do is remember to cancel it. So that's the difference between a type 1 versus type 2 decision making. One question which I ask all my guests on AltC is, what is your deeply personal definition of success? Now, society has a definition for you. You need to have a big house, car, blah, 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 blah. But what is your deep sort of definition? So I've heard some very interesting one definition given to me by a very well-known MC and a master of ceremonies who will probably interview the likes of Anand Mahindra and all of that. His definition of success is that he wants to have a half-an-hour nap in the afternoon. And he has literally gone seriously and built himself a nap room where he goes, switches off his phone and naps. That for him is success. For another very well-known folk rock singer, it was being able to find his voice and being able to use his voice, which he still uses every day, which earns him money. So it was whether earns money or not, but the discovery that he has a beautiful voice which he can use, that is success. And for him, no one can take it away. So I think define your own sort of personal, very, very deeply personal thing about what success means to you. The other set of books, if you guys like to read and want to sort of get into reading, then Thinking in Bets is a great way to think about it. Life is like a poker game, says Annie Duke, who herself is a poker champion. You don't know what hands the other people have been served, and you could be a great poker player, but you could still lose. So I think, how do you cope up with it? How do you think in bets? And by the way, I was just advising someone this evening, and I was just exactly using this framework with him to think about his career move in terms of how do you think in a bets. And he could say, oh, well, there were 4 bets, and if I take this bet, this is the most safest bet for me. Similarly, predictably irrational, we are some of the most irrational people, kind of take it. This is the reality. And we are predictably irrational. That's a good thing. So how do we use irrationality and what forces of decision making per se? This is what we need to think about. And of course, to quote Buddha, the guy who thought a lot about thinking and thought about thinking in so many different ways, there is a very, very mind-bending book. This is on the extreme end of mind-bending, which is called No Self, No Problem. You got to read it. And the interesting part is Chris talks about how neuropsychology is finally catching up to Buddhism 2,600 years later. And he has a workbook with it in case you want to do a workbook and kind of just lose yourself in that. I will share some of these links as well, which is on a very pragmatic note. There is Tim Ferriss, Define Your Fears, which is a fear setting thing I was talking about. This is a beautiful video called The Tail End, and which has now been turned into, the title has changed. It is called When This Number Hits 5,200, You'll Be Dead. Not particularly optimistic, but I would say realistic, neither pessimistic either kind of thing. I think sometimes zooming back helps you put your life into perspective so much more. On that continuum of mind bending, there's Carl Sagan's The Pale Blue Dot, beautiful 4-minute, 51-second video. You should definitely watch it and rewatch it from time to time. I think this is nothing kind of resets your mind like this video. It's so simple and so beautiful. And by the way, it comes from a thing called Cosmos, which was one of my favorite TV shows growing up, which is what I named the design system at Make My Trip. Just a long story there. If you want even more mind bending, this is that particular one talking about if you are not your thoughts, then who's thinking your thoughts? And this is again another one that you got to listen to a couple of times before you make sense of it. So these are things that you can, frameworks, things to read, things to hear, listen, see, that I leave you with. And this is a beautiful quote. I did not understand it in the early days, but now I understand it because suddenly everything starts to make sense. But for you, ignore the first bit. You got to look at the second bit, and you got to trust that in the future, whatever it is, the dots will connect, or you will have the right thoughts to connect the dots and find your own narrative, find your own story. With that, embrace the certainty of uncertainty and know that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'll let Shubhangi carry on, but thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for this wonderful presentation. I feel so happy that I was able to reach out to you and like have the initial conversations of putting this together. But really, I'm really grateful to be here. Um, with that, we can start with the Q&A. I request everyone to put your questions in the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen so that we can answer your questions very systematically. I see some of you all are already putting in your questions in the chat box, but put it in the Q&A box. Okay, so Alia is asking any advice for multi-passionate individuals. I think if somebody is passionate about a lot of things.
Yeah, I think we can be. I'm one of those characters because I'm into calligraphy and photography and 20 other things. I think you need to understand that I mean, you can have talent, you can have passion. The question is, where does your talent lie, which will, and again, unfortunately, this is the reality of our world, that you need to earn and you need to make money and you need to sustain yourself, etc., etc. Again, not necessary always, because you could go out there in a farm and live in very little. If that's you, then that's also perfectly good. But if that's not you, then look at one of those strands, look at where your talent, not necessarily your passion, lies, which will essentially you'll be able to barter your talent, your ability for the money. Essentially, that's what the value you're providing. People give you money because there is certain value they see, and that is the value you are reciprocally getting back. So I would say find that, focus on that one talent or that one or two talents which will get you good value for money or value for talent.
Great. Chris is asking, an ardent Design Up conference fan. I've been in creative and multimedia production for 20 plus years now. Now I'm at 40. I'm eager to start, learn, and master UI UX to become industry ready. Where and how should I begin to ensure a focused learning path without wasting time on unnecessary explorations? Even if I don't find opportunities to transition fully into UI UX, I want to have it as a professional skill in my arsenal. Would love to hear your insights and advices.
So I think the most necessary thing is the unnecessary exploration. What we think is play is actually work. And you will need to wander around and do a lot of unnecessary stuff because before it starts to make sense and make see, there are two parts to it. You need to do the thing that you like almost on a daily basis. So do you like UI? You want to get into UI UX? Then start doing it on a daily basis. You like doing calligraphy, you like doing kind of, I don't know, singing or whatever kind of thing. Now, because some of us are late into the game, will we transition? Will we? That each industry has its own unique settings, unfortunately or fortunately. Like like if you are a sports person, you will peak very early, and after that you need to sort of get into the whole a very long retirement phase. The good part about design is that you can still be fairly productive for a long period of time. But in this case, unfortunately, you will need to sort of explore and keep sort of dabbling into UX for a long time. And by that, I mean do a lot of exercises. There are a bunch of exercises that are out there, which are called UX exercises or something like that, which you do on a daily basis, put out your portfolio, see what you want to do. So this is a career transition question, really, kind of thing. There is, of course, the option of joining something like Academy and doing an online course, even if I'm kind of just, they are not selling it, I'm selling it. I'm just telling you that. And my good friend Shiva was part of doing the curriculum, so I can vouch that it's a good one. So that can actually help you transition faster. But the reality is that you will have to do a lot of, you'll have to waste a lot of time before something meaningful starts to make sense. I hope that answers your question.
And Jay, thank you for endorsing the UX course. I also actually want to add this, that, we actually are getting people like Chris. I have a 50-plus-year-old entrepreneur who enrolled 3 months back, 40 plus, mid-career professional from the creative industry. And, so these are people who are joining these courses, and it seems they are benefiting from it. And these are only the kind of people Shiva and I used to discuss about, that maybe we will get such people. But I like the way you put, getting out of the conversation, I like the way you put that wasting time in all of this. That, yeah, you have to waste a little bit of time before you know that it was not a waste.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Arnav has a very, very short. He's asking, it was an amazing PPT. How long did it take to make it?
So my PPT is a work in progress. This originally was done for IIT Guwahati, and this was right after COVID. So parts of it were already there. I repurposed some of that. What has happened is my PPTs are getting shorter and shorter. Also, I'm thinking more and more in terms of what is that one thing? What is it that I want to, what's that? How do I end with that message and what do I focus on? This is the end completely changes each time. The story doesn't, because that's the story. I mean, I can't change my story. So yeah, I think it didn't take too much of time. Increasingly, I spend a lot more time thinking. Maybe I'm driving or I'm being driven, and I think about what am I going to talk about. So that when I finally put it on screen, on the slide, the time taken is actually much less, but the time that I've thought through is much more. I hope that answers your question.
Jay, if I may add, when I read that question, I was going to say that if it's taken Jay his entire lifetime to put together this PPT.
True.
Yeah,
Create material for this PPT.
yeah. I mean, you first need to live this life, and
Yeah, true.
then think about it and then put it on slide. So to be honest,
Totally, yeah.
whatever is his age, that's how long it took him to make this PPT.
Yeah, you're so right. No, that's beautiful.
Ankit is asking, what challenges did you face at MMT when COVID paced and travel stopped? What was the design team up to at that time?
Yeah, that was a challenging time because what we did, so obviously everything stopped, and what MMT was trying to do was to do other things. I mean, one is that I got very, very busy in Arogya Setu. My first few months were super busy, or first, not the first few months, but after that it was super busy because I was working 24/7. And the write-up which I shared also was from that time, that 953, whatever meditations and what it taught me. It was a time when we decided to take up all the stuff which we said we will do, but never had time to do. So all those little kind of niggling problems, those back burner issues, we just brought it all back to the forefront, and we said, hey, you guys wanted to do this? Let's do this, because the engineering team is also kind of fairly free. All the UX backlogs, we just brought it up front. We decided to do it. Once I got free from Arogya Setu, it was like the first 4 months, but COVID continued for a very long time. One of the other things which I decided to take on was a holidays redesign thing, which was long pending again. So, and there's a beautiful write-up on that. I can share it with you folks, which is rethinking the holidays. And I wanted to just completely break it apart and rethink it from scratch overall to see what would a holidays section redesign feel like. There was one more very interesting project. I can't talk about it. It was my pet project. And we eventually did not do it, but we had the time to sort of indulge in it pretty much. So yeah, we did a lot of those experimentals, and we also put a podcast together, which was on Zoom, all about what do people do in in the middle of the pandemic. How do you do team meetings? How do you hire? Stuff like that. I have a way of keeping people busy, so I just keep throwing things at people.
No, but I was thinking, Jay, that, and because you've also quoted Buddha in this, so there is a bit of philosophy in life always. And always, the birthplace of creation is actually destruction. I mean, if we look at it, every creation is preceded by some destruction. And,
Yeah.
COVID was in a way that disruptive, if not destructive, space. And I think it created the opportunity for a lot of new things to happen, good or not good. We can make a decision on it a little later, but a lot and actually came out of COVID. I mean, COVID
Right.
told us that it was possible to do this, and so if anybody um, can at that time pause and not look at it only as destruction. There is what you have also shared, that you took time. I mean, of course, Arogya Setu was a demand or a need of the hour, but apart from that, pulling out things which had taken a back seat, but bringing them forth. And I've seen all around that so many interesting things came about just because, I mean, a virus decided that now your life is going to be, in this way. So
True.
I think it's adding to what you spoke about, that, how to deal with the certainty of uncertainty, because that's the only thing which is certain, that it's uncertain. So
True. Yeah.
you just make use of it, and I'm sorry, I'm taking a few seconds out of this. I actually had presented a paper during COVID, which was titled at that time, Using Crisis to Imagine the Future. And little
Right.
did I know at that time that, what was I saying and what was I posturing.
Yeah.
And now when I look at that time, and it was not even a flicker of thought in our head. But when I look back
Right.
at my paper, I look at how we've built, and it's exactly what I had proposed in the paper. So using
Right.
crisis to imagine the future. And at that time, I didn't even know if anybody would, even think of it. I just wrote whatever I was experiencing. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that to it, that, so much people talk about VUCA, BINA, whatever, and everything. I mean, finally, it's what Viktor Franklin said, you can't control anything but how you see a situation. That's all that you can control.
Exactly. How you make the narrative inside your head.
Yeah.
What you tell yourself. But that is where the whole role of thinking comes. You can have a terrible life and you think, I still had a beautiful life because I learned so much out of it. I still met great people, etc., etc. So I think when you think about the freedom fighters, people who were sent to death, who were sent to Kalapani, etc., etc., I mean, these were people who still went with a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, because it's the narrative inside your head, how you think about the problem and not the problem, and equally you will have people living in great lap of luxury and thinking, what a sad life I have.
Yeah.
So it could be anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've actually learned to embrace not just uncertainty, but disruption. Like, Great. Okay, life is telling me make something out of it. So, and that's a great way to look at it. Thank you for bringing that out. Shubhangi, we can go back to the questions. Yeah.
Obed is asking, I'm just starting to learn design as a whole, and there are so many niches in this domain. There's UI, UX, and there's graphic, and there's literally everything in design. How to enable design thinking in an individual uh, to think of design as a solution.
See, everything, it depends upon who you are and where you come from. So a finance guy will say everything is finance, and a politics guy will say everything is politics, and a design guy will say everything is design. So it's your way of looking at it. I mean, everything is design and is not design. So it can be either way that you look at it. I think design thinking at a fundamental level is common sense problem solving before schooling interfered with your education sort of thing, right? As kids, you were resourceful, you kind of looked at it differently, you went and talked to people. I think that's what it is. I mean, there is nothing much to it. So there is one part of it, which is the solutioning part of it, which is understanding the problem. The biggest part of design thinking is thinking around the problem and thinking around the people who are part or stakeholders in that problem itself. Then comes the part of the solutioning and creating the solution where tools and technologies, etc., come in. I think we have got too lost in the second part of it, which is the tools and the technologies bit of it, and sometimes don't think so much about the first part of it. Both are interlinked, but at some point of time, you can let go of either. So when you are a young designer, you are very focused on the latter part, like which tool are you using and how fast can you do this on Figma and blah, blah, blah. And then as you kind of mature and begin to understand the problem deeper, also because some problems are very complicated and not as simple as you think. So for example, again, Buddha has a very interesting word for it. He calls it the interdependent arising. Nothing exists on its own independently. Everything is a collection of various different cause and effects. And when you go deeper and deeper into the problem part of it, you begin to realize there are so many people who are actually contributing both to the problem and contribute to the solution as well. And for all of that, you might not need a tool or a poster or a website or anything. It might just be a mindset change. It might be a behavioral change. So how do you do that? So yeah, I think that's where it is. So for example, if you think about plastic and the overuse of plastic there, one is a technological side, is that can we have a plastic replacement which is easy to sort of compost, for example, right? That is a technological solution. But the bigger challenge is your mental sort of biases, prejudices, etc. Going back to the thinking part of it. So I think you will learn at this point of time. I would suggest patience. And if I can combine the next question by Anoop with this one, there is one message that I want to give to everyone, whether young, old, etc., which is that especially young, because I think young people and every generation of young people, when we were young, we were also very impatient and wanting to do more and more things and learn things and get ahead and do more things. You might notice trees, and the trees, the ones which actually grow very, very tall, have a very large and long trunk. After that, they start to have flowers and leaves, and the longer the trunk you have, the taller it grows. And what I'm implying here is a longer trunk also means that you have very deep roots. The first thing that any student or any young person should do is give it a patience and do a lot more, waste a lot of time doing things, learning things, sort of using your curiosity as roots to sort of go deeper and deeper into many things. When you have that long trunk, and the trunk might take 10 years to sort of, again, like the bamboo takes a lot of time to grow. The first few inches, the first few feet take a lot of time to grow. But once it grows, it goes very, very fast. So I think you need to focus on those early years of growth, the early years of learning, the early years of feeding your curiosity, and then you will pretty much grow.
Somebody is asking, if we are a multidisciplinary designer, meaning we do different designs like product and interior and graphic, but a fresher, should we create a portfolio containing all of our work, or should we focus on only one?
So very pragmatically talking as an employer, when I am wearing my employer hat, I will look for who I'm employing and what do they bring to the table. And as a teacher, as purely as someone who's as a mentor, as a coach, I might say, hey, this is lovely, you've done some great work. And eventually you are doing design problems that you're solving. Your tools and techniques may be different. But as an employer, I am looking at you to sort of fulfill a particular role. So I'm looking at you from that perspective, very selfishly, to see that can I bring you in and will you be a good fit for that particular niche role that I have. It is rare to find roles, especially for freshers, which are very broad in nature. When you become very senior, then your kind of roles can become very, very broad. But when you are very young, you people are looking for one or two things that you do really, really well. So I think your answer is there. Focus on a few things, focus on a few things that you're really good at, and just polish and do more in that, or showcase more in that area.
Jay, if I may just add in academicians, and
Please, yeah.
I've been an employer as well, a longer been an employer than this. You can either have separate portfolios and find a way to link them. So if I'm looking for a graphic designer, you send me your graphic design portfolio, but there is a provision for me to also look at other things. But I'm focused on your graphic design work, because like Jay rightly said, that especially when you are a fresher, there is a very small, narrow competency that I'm finding a fit for. So show us that. If you can make a website and you can do an interesting 3 different pages for each of them and show me a a home page with the broad this thing, that will be great too. But I won't want, I mean, don't dilute yourself by saying that I can do everything. I'm so Jay, I was trained as a product designer, and I always believe
Right.
that a product that is designed for everybody serves nobody. So don't don't do that hey, I can do everything. So then the employer will feel ke, Arey, then what? Right? So don't dilute your competency presentation that way. Okay.
And
Somebody
the same thing as Prachi was saying, sorry, just aside, I think what we were talking about earlier also, that some people, we talk about people having clarity of thinking, very clear thinker, etc., etc. What employers are also looking for is focused thinking, clear thinking. And when you say that, so what do you want to be? Do you want to be a furniture designer or interior designer or this? And everything is there. What it means is like you are hedging your bets, that in case I don't find a job in product design, I can get into furniture, if not furniture, graphic, if not graphic, interior. But then people are less likely to take you seriously. So yeah. Sorry,
Absolutely.
please go ahead, Shubhani.
I've completed my graduation in computer science engineering, and my question is it a good choice to go with UI UX design, and from where do I start?
So there is no right or wrong answer. I mean, it is really, there are 2, 3 ways of looking at it. There is one very interesting story, which has been, someone attributes it to the Chinese. Someone says, no, it was the IKEA founder who said it. Whatever it is, the story goes on something like this. A farmer's son finds a wild horse in the jungle. The farmer's son brings it. It's very hard to get tamed. It throws the farmer's son off. So first people are saying, look at him, he's so lucky he found a horse. Then the horse throws this farmer's son off and he breaks his leg. And people say, look at him, he's so unlucky because, he broke the leg. And then lo and behold, the king's men come in to sort of get all the young people, because there's a war starting and they want all the young people to go to the war. And the people again say that look at him, he's so lucky because he broke his leg and he cannot join the war. So he'll be home. Now, what is right or wrong, lucky, unlucky, is something we have a very narrow view of. But I think when you zoom out, you don't know what is the right choice or not. The question that you should ask, reframe the question in terms of that, do I like it so much? Am I so committed, so passionate that I'm going to give it the next 5 years or 10 years, even if things don't go right, don't go my way? Because I've seen enough number of people, and actually I had someone earlier, again, from a coaching perspective, who talked about if this doesn't work, then I'll go to that, and that doesn't work. And actually I've already moved from A to B, and if B doesn't work, I'll go to C. But in this case, for example, if you take my story, I think there have been so many times that I've been out of job for a year sometimes as well, or out after kind of losing my job. Now the question is that, do you still either like, I don't know anything else to do, or you're so committed to it that you will find a way of getting back at it? So if you have that commitment, if you have that talent and that passion, jump in. If you look at certain people, some people will say that, listen, UI UX is peaking, this is just the wrong time to get into UI UX, please don't do that, which is also fine. People may say, hey, AI is coming in and maybe there is a way for UX to go into the AI realm. So maybe this is a great time. Both are right. Neither of them are completely wrong. They're both wrong and both right. So it is your decision, your way of looking at things.
I think this is something that I've noticed very recently, like after COVID, maybe, that people tend to get influenced a lot by the trends in the industry, making a career choice, because it's become very frequent and very easily to switch careers now. And so now people are very influenced by trends. And because UI UX was speaking a lot couple of years back and is still in demand, one of those careers that is in demand, I think a lot of people sort of want to pick up this skill and they don't question it a lot, that am I going to be good at it, or is this one of those skills um that is coming from a place of wanting to do this, but is it driven by trend? And hence, I feel like this is one of the questions that we get a lot in these sessions that we hold with like people like you. So yeah.
If
And
I
there are
want
too
to,
many influences.
yeah, and I want to come back to, Jay, your presentation spoke about self-awareness in that one place where you had those, I think in the thinking, in the word
Yeah,
cloud space, yeah,
yeah.
self-awareness. I think the answer to this question is also in that. I mean, what do you want to do? Actually, yes, trend and what is the demand and so on and so forth and all of that. But when you say that, I want to do this, what is it that is driving your choice? Jay also spoke about, the decisions, that on what basis are you taking those decisions. So I just wanted to add a question, Jay, over here for you. I know there are a lot of questions, but I also want to bring one of my questions in. Uh, when we are taking these decisions in our, it may be small and it may be big, there is an inner compass that, you refer back to. Uh, so maybe my question has two parts to it. One is more to get to know you. What is in your inner compass? What is it that you are looking for? What is on your inner compass? What are those markers? And the other is, which I think will be more helpful to our audience, is that, how do you go about defining or finding your inner compass, because that can then guide all these so many questions or decisions to be taken.
No, I think this is a good one. The first one, of course, is a very deep one because I think after so many years, I'm on the other end of the mind-bending quest to sort of really understand what is it inside of us. I mean, I've done enough of work in what is outside of us, and looking more at, and by the way, I've been a brand guy, done so many at one point of time, branding, symbols, and all of that. What, but there is a world which is on the other end of the spectrum, which is no symbols, no sign, no nothing, but somewhere deep inside us, that's my quest. So I sometimes jokingly kind of say that people say I'm an aspiring XYZ. I say I'm an aspiring monk, actually. So that
Oh,
is my sort of even,
so am I.
yeah.
Good to meet, good to meet you.
And the harder one is actually the whole notion of dissolving your own ego. And I kind of keep reminded in talks like this, I'm talking about I, me, and myself and my journey, etc., etc. But the whole notion of how do you dissolve everything kind of, and so that's probably very going into much more deeper territory. I'll just go back and come back. I think it is to understand. I think it goes back to who are you? What do you want to do? That is where the question is. The question about what does success mean to you, not the neighbors or your friends or your friends' moms and your mom's definition of success, but what is your deep success mean to you? Like I have a lot of friends who are very happy. Like I have a friend who's given up everything and she lives on a farm and she tends to dogs and she's very happy. I mean, she was in the corporate world. She kind of realized this is not what she was meant to do, etc. She has found what she doesn't need loads of money. She doesn't need a big house or anything, right? So that also is perfectly good. But like what Shubhangini was saying, sometimes we are influenced by we see actually the fact that, hey, we saw a report where they said the highest paying jobs in design are in UX. So I will become a UX designer. So was the money the motivation, which is fine. I think it's nothing wrong in it. Absolutely nothing wrong in it. Do you want to be famous? Great. That's also perfectly good. Actually, watch my interview with Pablo Stanley. He talks about all of this, where he talks about like, what is your motivation? Just own up to it and be realistic about it. The thing is about knowing yourself. When you understand what is compulsively driving you, I think you'll be much more honest with yourself. Otherwise, you're neither honest with the world outside nor with yourself. At least be honest with the world inside of you. So, and sometimes it's not that we are trying to be dishonest, we just don't know. I think that's where it goes back to. I think find your inner compass is what I would tell all of you. And then I know it's not easy. I'm looking back at decades and decades and suddenly say, oh, wish I knew that at 20 or 15 or 17. By the way, this is another question to my guests, and very often they say, hey, I would tell my 16-year-old that, you know, everything's going to be okay. Don't be anxious. Don't be all frustrated and all of that. But at the stage that you are in, it is easy to be. At the stage I am in, it is easy for me to give you gyan. But you will find one category of videos on YouTube. They are called, it took me 15 years to learn this, but you can learn it in 7 minutes. You will find a whole bunch of them, 20 years, and you will learn it in 15 minutes, etc., etc. Yeah. Fact is, you will not. And I have seen my son go through this, and therefore I know that I can tell you all the ways which you can go wrong and you can fall and everything can happen. But you have to go through your own path. You have to fall, you have to hurt yourself, you have to cry, you have to bleed, and then you have to learn it. It may have taken me 20 years to learn. I can teach you in 9 minutes, but you will not learn it in 9 minutes. You will learn it in 20 years only. That's the reality of it all.
Absolutely. And that's the science of learning, by the way, that each one of us has to construct our own knowledge. We cannot survive on borrowed knowledge. Nobody can. I can share my experiences, but you have to walk your own journey. Beautifully put, Jay. Shubhangi, let's quickly go through. And I know that we've overshot our time, but we'll quickly go through the questions, Shubhangi.
Mahima is asking, you mentioned that we're all irrational, so can we use it in the UX field?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, this is one of the foundations of what I talk about, especially when I'm talking to engineers about this, because when engineers build things, they assume we are all rational beings and 1 + 1 will always be 2. And, everyone will use the software only one way. But, and this is my biggest pitch to, especially in the bank that I work in, I keep talking to them about the fact that, you've done this system in a certain way. But imagine you had a bad road rage incident in the morning and you're storming into office and you're you're shattered, and or you had a fight with your husband or your wife or your kid or whatever. Your mind is in a different state. If you have only one way of, you might make a mistake. Is the software aware? Is the software done in a way that it can avert the mistake or at least flag up something where it is not like everything will only be like a manual that you've got to use? And a lot of stuff done in our world, whether you're looking at the UX of a washing machine or a dishwasher or lifts to everything, is done by engineers. And by the way, the apartment which I live in has about 29 floors. And every day I look at people who have been using the lift also fumble at, because their obvious mental model is that the higher floors will be at a higher number and the lower floors will be at lower numbers. But it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to something like that. And everyone is super confused and everyone's looking around to see, oh, 29 is actually at the bottom and 7 is at the top, those kinds of things, right? But logically, they are right. I mean, they did a logic of bottom to top, then again, bottom to top, bottom to top. But that doesn't work. So I think we are predictably irrational. We are not necessarily logical creatures. If you go for a visa interview, you know that because it depends upon the visa officer's mood, how they arrange, and they might stamp it. It is not logic. They might say, okay, I don't like the look of your face. Why? I have no idea, kind of thing. But there is where irrationality always plays with our mind. So UX, I think you should definitely read predictably irrational. There is another follow-up to that. It's called the upside of irrationality, which is how you can use irrationality to work on your side pretty much. So yeah, both of them are great.
Moving on, somebody's asking what is your opinion of the UX design industry in India as an insider? I've heard so many people who got into UX but are disappointed by the kind of jobs that they've come across.
So UX in India, I think, is at, so if I think about it, the last 25, 30 years, three larger parts. The first part is UX in India is growing. People don't take it seriously. They think Indians don't know UX, etc., etc. We work very hard to prove that we are there, we understand, we get it. The second phase, so I was part of the end of the last phase when I was establishing Adobe. The next phase is the most beautiful phase where suddenly everyone starts to believe in UX and they say, okay, let's do it. But there are no, so if you think about it, I mean, when Make My Trip or other people came in, they were like, yeah, UX is now suddenly important. Make My Trip already was 16 years old and it suddenly said now UX has got to make it work. I see Zomato is doing a good job. Swiggy is just catching up. So it was a golden period of UX design where everyone is actually kind of realizing the importance of UX design and doing it. So over a period of a decade, that practice peaks in the sense that everyone comes to a certain level of good UX design. Now comes the third phase of it, which we are seeing, where people are saying, listen, we solved what we had to solve. The business is doing really well. Again, if I take the Make My Trip example, if I look from the time when I left to today, nothing has significantly changed. What has changed, and which might frustrate a lot of people, is that your icons change, your animation changes, your marketing banner changes. But fundamentally, the app doesn't change because we cracked it. And that formula works very, very well. So it's almost like saying that you crack the formula to win your T20 games or your one-day internationals and all of that. Your players will keep changing, but we will not significantly make any change overall. You just enjoy the game as it is, right? So you might find it frustrating because there are not a lot of fundamental problems to solve. And I think I've just been plain lucky to live through that phase where there were deeper fundamental problems to solve, where we are recreating the whole thing from ground up. Now everyone is saying, like, if I look at Swiggy, for example, and a lot of friends work there, a guy who used to work with me in Adobe who I had hired, I put him there, or rather, we got him in there as the head of design for Swiggy. If you look at Swiggy, Swiggy is polishing stuff which is already shiny and already very well polished. You will have nicer animation, you will have jumping icons and more funny looking people and 3D icons and 2D icons and everything will change. But is Swiggy changing fundamentally? No, there isn't much to change. So, but hang on, I think the only interesting part which may come, and I have no idea, I cannot predict it, is what will AI bring to the whole table and what does it mean? But it might not mean the visual design styles that we used to follow in the earlier years. So that is the long story short.
Yeah. What is the design industry expecting from freshers now or maybe in the upcoming days?
There are two ways to answer it. I think one way to say is that they're looking for a lot of curiosity and hard work here. And the second way to answer it is they are probably not looking for freshers in some ways, because they are suddenly seeing that AI can do fill in a lot of those gaps. So here's the question to rephrase is, how can I do what an AI cannot do? So, and this is going to be, and I talk to a lot of my friends at my level in the industry who have spent many, many decades here, is that I can actually, AI doesn't take a holiday. AI, I can keep on torturing or asking or requesting, and it'll keep on throwing me a lot of different options, which sometimes I cannot get from my employee or intern or so on. I think the question here is for freshers to be able to understand and analyze the problem that is being given to them. I think that is the most important part. And being able to respond very quickly with a lot of quick iterations, saying, hey, I want A, B, C, D. Don't do finished stuff, but at least in terms of directions, what can you do? And then you can again finish it off and fine tune it, and you can go into the tools and all of that. Don't jump into the tools. Understand the problem. Think about a few different approaches, and eventually go into finishing and fine tuning it. That's the way I would. And keep asking yourself this question: what can I do better than an AI? One is you can make good coffee, hopefully, but apart from that, is there something else?
May I add two things maybe to this list? I think they're also looking. It's a very maybe a minor thing, but how well do you understand and take instructions? So to a fresher, a brief is being given, and it's not a broad brief. It's not a brief coming from the client. Somebody, your manager, your design head, has interpreted the brief, given it to you. How well do you understand that instructions? I've seen Jay a lot of times, because we keep talking to people who are recruiting our graduates to understand that, where are the problems, this thing. So one of the things that I've been told is that at least so far our learners are able to interpret the instructions. So I've gathered this, that interpreting the instructions is something that they're doing, and being ready to do small jobs and proving themselves in doing small jobs before a big opportunity. They're trusted with a big opportunity. So coming back to and circling back to what you said earlier about having the patience, it will happen. It will come to you. Don't think that your job, your life is gone. ये तो पता नहीं क्या करा रहे हैं मुझसे ऐसे छोटे छोटे काम. It's all right. Prove yourself in those छोटे छोटे काम. And one day your manager will have the trust and will give you the big work that you want to do. So just
Totally,
just do those chote chote kaam also with as much, like immersion, So the two things that I've added to Jay's list.
No,
Shubhangi.
totally. And this goes back to that whole idea about building your trunk or growing your trunk and growing your roots. Because initially you will not see flowers and petals and trees, leaves and all of that. It's just getting your trunk up there, making it a solid foundation where you're so right, Prachi. You got to that, and this is again going back to the whole notion of what does AI do better than me? You give it one line, it interprets it pretty well overall, right? For the fact that it's not a human, it's a machine. So can you do a 10x job of that? That pretty much would be itself. You got to ask questions. Sometimes you got to ask, I did not understand. Could you explain it to me? I think do that. That probably is the foundational level thing. And you're so right, Prachi, on that.
Thank you. So, Shubhangi, I do want to make an announcement because I know that we've kept Jay for a very long time. There are questions here.
I'm good for another 10 minutes. I'm good for absolutely. If you want to give that.
My apologies to our attendees that we may not be able to go through the entire list of Q&A because we've really overshot. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we just have to respect Jay's time as well. So yeah, Shubhangi, if you want to pick a couple of them, Jay, you want to pick up a couple of them, or Shubhangi, feel free to do that. But we certainly won't be able to go through all of them.
To do that only.
Jay, do you want to pick any? I mean, if you've read through them, otherwise Shubhangi will pick.
Very quickly, I think I'm reading Arnav's question on if I want to build myself as a brand and showcase my skills. Yeah, I think, see, this is the interesting part of it, and you have talked about UI, UX, cinematography, photography. Yes, I think a lot of these are your interests. Some of these are your passions, hobbies, etc. Distinguish your passion, hobbies, side projects, etc. from your main work, which brings you money. I think that's the first thing for you to note. Um, I would definitely encourage you to do a lot of side projects because your side projects at some point of time becomes your main project. Like Design Up for me has become so huge now that it's bigger than maybe what I do. So I think this is always great. Always keep having side projects and keep doing it. But one of the things I would tell to Arnav and to everyone else, so the problem which I keep, and by the way, I read this beautiful piece from a monk, from a former monk, who talks about we have come into the world of performative everything. We have performative leadership, we have performative whatever design, we have, and he was talking about one political figure brandishing one of those chainsaws at a recent event and stuff like that. That it's not about leading, it's about showing that you are leading. It's about performing that you are leading. That has become more important than the actual act of leading. So I think don't, I know you might be thinking, hey, if I don't build my brand, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing that a lot of your brand is built by being able to stay for a long time in the long game. So play the long game. Don't play the short game of having a website, having 10 pictures today and having something next week and like every month and all of that. Really look and focus and playing the long game. And by the way, I had sent a newsletter recently also, which talked about why Design Up is an excellent example of playing the long game. It has been around for the 9th year now. People have grown with it. People I knew as interns have now become moms and dads, and they have their jobs and they're leading teams and all of that. But the fact is that a lot of these actually pay you back in terms of dividends, because these are relationships which grow over time. These are sort of skills which grow over time. You're maybe looking at few months, few weeks, like my 10 by 10 matrix. Maybe your last 10 ends at 10 months, but I'm talking about a 10-year matrix where I'm talking about how can you play that long game where all those relationships that you build, it's not just about showcasing your skills. It's about doing a project with someone, helping someone do a project, going and volunteering your time with an NGO and saying, okay, I can do this for you, and not necessarily showcasing it. But I think those are going to get you more connections, more value than just being able to showcase it on a website or on Instagram or whatever. So yeah, my 2 bits on that.
Wonderful. I'm using my veto to say that, it's timeout time for
I
now.
think everybody's gotten a chance to ask one question. I just want to ask like one closing question,
Yes,
like
you
true
Sure,
to
yeah.
my indulgent self, which is Jay, I want to ask you, if you were to redesign anything from a safety pin to something as big as the Delhi Metro railway system, and as the UX expert, what would you redesign?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would really rethink and redesign is actually it's an ecosystem. I would say it's the ecosystem of, or the cycle and the ecosystem of packaging, how we discard packaging, the sewage system, which carries it all. So I think it's that whole larger, our behavior system of throwing packets down and but the very fact is, why do we have plastic? So I'm thinking, and it's like a Hydra problem, because there are so many heads to it. You chop off one, another one comes up. So you can't say just plastic, because even if it's not plastic, people will throw thermocol or people will throw something else. And it's the behavior, but it's also the sewage system in the way it carries it down and then dumps it somewhere, and then it ends up in sort of the oceans. So I think that would be for me very unsexy, and but a real thing to think about.
That's beautiful. And when you have a month to spare, Jay, you should come down to Delhi. We'll host you here, and we will do a student. I mean, we may not end up redesigning this ecosystem, but we'll have fun. I mean, we'll do it in IID. We can't do it in AND. We'll do it in IID.
Right.
We'll have a room
Yeah.
full of enthusiastic students thinking about this, because I can already imagine the studio coming alive with this. But we'll probably need a month, because other than that, we'll just be, doing. So whenever you have a month to spare,
Sure. Yeah,
we'll,
actually, it's a very long project, so it's
yeah.
a worth doing actually.
Yeah, I mean, in 1 month, you'll have enough ideas that you can then take forward, maybe. Well, this has been
Yeah.
a wonderful evening, Jay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed both the presentation, but I have to say more the conversation following the presentation. I've thoroughly enjoyed, and really, my gratitude to you for making this time for us.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone asking so many questions and staying back. Thank you so much for all the wonderful audience. Shubhangi and Prachi, thank you for making it so easy.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for all the insights. I feel so happy being part of this session. Thank you for all the attendees who stuck around till 8:30 now, and we've overshot our time by a lot. But thank you for all your patience. And with that, I say bye bye.